Good afternoon, one and all. Welcome you all for the third session of the day of Atal FTP Computational Mathematics and Artificial Intelligence for Engineers. Now, I would like to introduce the speaker of the session, Dr. Professor P.G. Bhatt. He has a technical officer in an Indian Navy for 21 years. He held several posts involving software development and project management apart from other technical jobs. After retiring from the Navy in 1996, he has worked as a senior manager at HCL Period System and also VPS Object Orbit Technologies as founding managing director of Parity Computing India and as a president of Pulma Knowledge Solution. He is also an advisor for few schools on teaching methods and general management. He is associated with few NGOs. He is visiting faculty at a very few educational institutes. He participates in various seminars on application of technology for social goods as keynote speaker and panelist. Now I request the speaker to present the screen.
Thank you, madam. Kind of you. I'm very glad to be with all of you this afternoon.
Thank you, sir. Pleasure is ours.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure. Yeah.
It's a great opportunity for me to interact with the academic community because ultimately you are running the temple of learning and we are on the sidelines and trying to do whatever little support we can. We are the beneficiaries. So thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this and share a few simple thoughts about it. The name of the topic is quite deep and meaningful and relevant. I'm going to talk about a few very simple things, practical, and which can relieve the personal pain points. Some places it can relieve, and in some places improve our efficiency and effectiveness of teaching, touching upon that. And I do invite interruptions and discussions anytime. If somebody wants to say, no, I don't agree with you, that is the best thing to happen. Because whenever there is a variance, that is the point of learning. If everything is uniform, there is nothing much to learn. So generally the tasks of the teachers, the main task of teaching, I think all of us enjoy. Preparing to teach.
Excuse me, sir. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Sir, sorry to interrupt. I think still some participants are joining. Maybe they are taking some 2 to 3 minutes extra.
Okay.
So can we wait for 2 minutes?
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah,
please give me a cue. Please let me know when we should start.
Yeah. They are joining because I think lunch before lunch session was extended for a time. So
okay. So I will
just
clear
2 minutes.
I will clear the memory of what I just spoke.
Okay.
Like, the magic plan, like Harry Potter stuff.
Right. Magic plan. Yeah.
Is it any better now? Hello?
Yeah, I think, sir, we can start now. I
Okay.
think
No,
we can start. It's 38
is-
now. Yeah,
yeah,
right.
Is the voice fine?
Yes, voice is fine, sir. Perfect.
Okay.
No problem.
Thank you. Thank you. Because Dr. Geeta was telling that it is not very audible.
Is it? Okay.
Okay, fine. Because I'm using, hello?
Yeah.
Okay, then. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And thanks for this opportunity to connect with esteemed teachers. To repeat, I'm not going to talk anything exotic. I will talk something that I consider practical, which will help all of us in our profession. I've never been a teacher by profession, but I love teaching because that is an opportunity to learn anytime. When you are employed as a teacher, when you do the task of a teacher, as we grow in the career, in the profession, we keep doing less teaching and more of other tasks. The more senior a person is, the less hours he or she teaches, but is tasked with a lot of other things, like in addition to the teaching, sometimes related to teaching, sometimes unrelated, some supporting tasks. For example, we know this NAC inspection, how much of work people do. I've seen it happening. And every time I think, oh, I wish this could have been automated. I wish this was simplified. So whenever there is a boring tasks, we have to try to automate it. So if we continuously keep seeing what is the opportunity to automate, what is repeated task, even if it is simple, even if it takes 5 minutes at a time, 2 minutes at a time, but we do it over and again, even if it is not difficult, it gets boring. And when something we do is not enjoyable, the quality suffers. It is not rewarding to us or to the people who are beneficiary of that task. One more thing, what happens, there is a repeated process, repeatable process, and expected accuracy. When I say expected accuracy, the tool may do something less than acceptable accuracy, then you've got an opportunity to improve. Once we improve every time after that, because the tool repeats itself without any mind of its own, we will get better results. So there is a easier way of continuous improvement. Another place is a task which is difficult to do manually, but it can be done with the help of a tool. So these are the places where we can look for automation and spare more time for productive and more rewarding kind of work. We all teach how to build tools, how to make tools, etc. Like a shoemaker's children walk barefoot, they say.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, tell me.
Sir, can you share the screen, sir?
Yeah, I will start sharing.
Yeah,
the
yeah,
screen
sir. Thank
in a
you.
moment.
Yes, sir.
In a moment, I'll share the screen. They say that a shoemaker's children go barefoot because he's making shoes for others. And we are busy making others capable of making tools, and we don't make tools for ourselves. So let us see some simple opportunities where we can make our own tools or use available tools and work on it. I will share the screen. I've sent this document in advance. I'll also discuss how I made this document using the tools which will be useful. One good tool I found that I use for the past 5-6 years regularly for teaching, sharing work, discussing work is Jupyter Notebook, Jupyter Lab. This has come from Berkeley University. This Jupyter project is adopted by Berkeley University. They got a Jupyter Hub. And From their website, I learned that 90% of the classes are conducted using Jupyter Notebook, irrespective of the humanities subject, technical subjects, medicine, whatever it is, they are using Jupyter Notebook to teach. And I've seen some demonstrations and very impressive. And whatever I'm sharing with all of you is developed by Jupyter, using Jupyter Notebook. You can see on the left here, there is a sign of the Jupyter. Another encouraging thing is that it has gone through various versions. Right now, we say Jupyter Notebook or Jupyter Lab. That is the name they have officially adopted now. From Jupyter Notebook, they have graduated to Jupyter Lab. That is the latest they have. And there are many other tools which are riding over Jupyter Notebook or Jupyter Lab, whatever you like to call it. In addition to that, Google Colab, those of you who have used Google Colab would understand its advantage. Google Colab is another notebook. It is an adaptation of Jupyter Notebook on the Google Cloud. It gives a lot many advantages because it runs on the Google Cloud or Google Drive. If I have a Google Drive, I upload all the teaching materials there. And this notebook I can run on a tool called Google Colab. It runs on the cloud, so I don't have to worry about setting up my computer or the student's computer. The main advantage that I see is, like, I mostly conduct my courses using Python. And if all the students, say a class of 60, if each one of them has to install, just a moment. If each one of them has to install, there is a time needed for them to install, and the compatibility issue. One minute. A compatibility issue from one computer to another computer. Their capability, the students' capability, whether they are able to install and make everything compatible with other software, these challenges come up. And their computer may not be powerful enough to run some of the programs that we use. Once we consider, give me half a minute, this seems to be an urgent call coming up time and again, despite my switching off. So the compatibility issue is removed, and the students can come with the lowest kind of computer that helps us. And even as teachers, for us, we don't even have to carry our laptops or our computers to the classroom if something is already available, because we're accessing everything from the cloud. And we get fairly decent standard processor from Google, free of cost. Even we can get GPUs and TPU for a limited period. So this removes the burden. And we don't have to maintain, don't have to worry whether our version of the courseware is synchronized with what the students see. That problem also is removed. We have to work with only one version, which is totally shared with the students. They can see it. If you allow them, they can modify the typical sharing. So this is the practice that I have enjoyed doing, especially with the online classes. I found it very, very convenient to use Google Colab. And other tools that I'm sure most of you or all of you are using, like the Google Class, Moodle, etc. In addition to that, this gives us some personal power because we have got more flexibility. We are not using a ready tool, but we are using an environment, a framework we are using. Now let us say that is about the tools that we can use, where I have found a lot many benefits and advantages using it for several years. Now let us say, they say that know your audience before we speak to somebody, or know your customer before you sell something. So our audience being students, what can we learn about students? to start with simple things. Later, we will see what other tools we can build using very simple steps. So we want to have an understanding of the student demography. Student demography, what I tend to do, or what has helped me is ask the students to fill up a form, Google Sheet, with some personal data and some professional data. In my template, I got 17 parameters in the personal data, like the name, student ID, mail ID, phone number, mother tongue, hometown, home state. We will see the reason for each one of them, what we can gain out of that. Experience, graduation level, because the postgraduates, when you're teaching, what is their specialty, date of birth, height, weight. Each one has a reason which helps us to teach further. Similarly, say if I'm teaching a course which requires some Python skills, so 11, 20, whatever number of skills that I can subdivide from the core skills that they require, I ask them what is their proficiency in each one of them, rating the scale of 1 to 5. So these are the necessary data that I collect always before we start teaching to get the student demographic. Sometimes we get 1 day in advance, sometimes we get 1 month in advance. Now, analyzing this student demography, we get a feel of the crowd that I'm going to meet in the classroom, in person, or even in online. Nobody is visible to me right now, but I know the people whom I'm talking to are very highly qualified, highly experienced, coming from all over the country. So that kind of information itself is useful than not knowing anything. And I have in my visibility only my screen. This also gives us a feel of student distance from the teacher. Emotional distance, knowledge distance, age distance, physical distance anyway is something. Even when you're physically there in the class, the other distances are there. So if you can quantify some way how far we are from our audience, helps us to formulate our thoughts better, deliver better. The student preparedness for the course. Like say I'm teaching a course on machine learning. And most of the universities, if you go to their website, they say to take up a course on the machine learning, the student should have undergone some introductory courses, and they should have at least 1 year of programming experience in programming language like R or Python, depending on the language the professor chooses to teach the subject with. So if they don't have this kind of preparedness, then we already have got a beginner's problem. We do not know how to start the course. Do we spend time explaining the basics so that they're up to speed? Or we assume, okay, they will work hard and pick up. Or say, okay, it doesn't matter whether they understand or not, we go ahead. I've been given a syllabus, I will teach the syllabus, prerequisites, I do not know. It is like if you take a team of people to the base camp of Himalaya for mountain climbing, mountaineering, go up to the Kailash Parvat. But if to reach the base camp, if they're not done the rigorous exercises, if they're not prepared themselves with the necessary training, at least for 2 to 3 months, we have got a crowd, you are the team leader, taking them up the mountains, but they don't have the necessary stamina. They do not know what is a mountain. They do not know how to breathe in the high altitude. Then what happens? So this is a situation that we face sometimes. We get a bunch of people, students, keen to learn, not a fault of theirs, not your fault, but they're in the base camp without the preparation. So your challenge as a guide and the leader of the team for this mountaineering is much different and much bigger. And once you're in the class, once you're in the job, you have to accept the reality. You have to accept the students as they are and do the best that we can in that situation. So knowing these factors, knowing the audience definitely helps us. We are half prepared. In one aspect, we are better prepared. Now let us say, how can we get an aspect of it? How can we benefit, or how can we analyze this one? Very simple. Now, in this context today, there are participants of FDP. It is not a classroom, and our interaction is limited to 1.5 hours, not 1.5 months, or not a full semester. So I don't have to go for a very deep analysis, but by just the registration information that all of you have given, and Dr. Radhagupta has kindly shared with me, 140 participants. Now, by the information that you had given, not specifically asked for the purpose of analysis, but innocently, unknowingly, you have given some information about you. When you give some information about you, you have given power over you to somebody, to know you better, to know the crowd better, not as an individual, but the aggregated information, the summary information can be helpful. We will limit to visualizing your experience, that's all. Because there is no information about the sex, no information about age, information about specialty is there, but it will take me good amount of time because you are so specialized, each one. So how to aggregate them, how to say, okay, it is a math or engineering or management. I will not spend the time. Now, if you just look at the experience that you have entered, I just take the usual statistics that all of us would take. Mean of experience, 11.33 years. Mode is 15 years. Standard deviation, 6.9 years. The range is 27 years. The person with the maximum experience in the crowd has 27 years experience, and there are some freshers. Now this gives me a feel, yes, which crowd I am talking to. More than looking at my screen, in my own mind, I know the crowd that is listening to me, sparing me so much of time, and what kind of talks I can delve into. But if the majority were just freshers, or the majority were just far above, the kind of talks, the kind of presentation, or the document that the preparation itself, when I start preparing itself, it has got an influence on me, telling that how I should prepare for this crowd. If possible, we can bring some method into that. Now, apart from the numbers, if it helps, by another line of code, we can plot some graphs, like years of experience, a box plot indicating the spread. There is no outlier anywhere here. And very clearly indicating, okay, the median is here, or the mode is here, whatever it is. Where there is a bias or skew kind of thing. And in this case, I have grouped the experience to less than 5 years, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, etc. And we have got a bar graph. And we see 10 to 15 years, as indicated earlier, 15 being the mode, has got the highest number of people in that range, 10 to 15 years. And there is a histogram. And I know that Dr. Radhagupta and her team will have to make a report after this course is over. And if anything is funded by a government agency, then they expect a report. To include this kind of report, okay, this is the kind of crowd we had, adding more information onto this. Apart from preparing ourselves to interact with the crowd that we are with, even for the participant, not only for the person who is talking, even for the participants, you know the crowd in which you are sitting by just looking at that. And knowledge, when you see something, that itself is an influencer unknowingly. Like they say, when you observe something, you're already influenced. Similarly, you're also influenced by observing something. And here again, it gives me a clear idea that I'm sitting in an august crowd. Out of the participants, 59 are PhDs, indicated by the prescript of your name that you have put, the title that you have put, the doctor, so-and-so, Dr. Radhagupta. If somebody has not put, there is a small mix-up, but the general pattern of the high level of education and experience is indicated to me and to all the participants, telling them, okay, this is the kind of people I'm interacting with. It's a good thing to do. And we can summarize other parameters like the discipline and specialty, the institute from where you come, the states from where you come. A lot of other things we can analyze or summarize. There is nothing to analyze here, we can summarize, which can be revealing by itself How it can be revealing, we will see subsequently. We are not dwelling too much on the participants now. But you see, these are the information which are just quietly gathered from what you have given in the registration form. That's it. Now let us talk about a tale of 3 B schools. Currently, I'm teaching third semester students of MBA in 2 schools who are learning machine learning related, okay, directly machine learning. And another post-graduation course on management, they are learning exploratory data analysis, EDA, sans machine learning. There is no machine learning topic for them. Let us say I will call the schools D, P, and K. And the students in these classes are 62, 41, and 47. The usual class that we expect. It's not a small class of 15 people or 12 people, 7 people. Like some of the top-notch schools, their class strength they limit to 15. Like National Institute of Design, they don't take more than 15 people. If you go to ISI, their class strength would be 7 to 10. But I'm talking about the normal schools that most of us would be associated with. Before the course, as I mentioned in the beginning, we seek data on their educational background and programming skill. Say 15 parameters. We say if I teach and I say, how do you know about what is your level of confidence in lists, dictionaries, data frame, testing? So I would ask, depending upon the syllabus that one has to cover, we seek input on their educational background and programming skills so that we know where to fit. Now, often students may not be forthcoming with the data. I tell them, you give me fake data, that is fine. No data, that is also fine, because when somebody does not give a data, he is already revealing something. So in schools D and P, most of the students have entered their data. And in school K, only 55% of them have entered the data. The normal hypothesis for us would be, if they have not even given their personal data, are they likely to work on the assignments? Will they do the homework? Will they attend? Or will they be serious? That kind of thought would come to our mind. But that is something that has to be confirmed on the ground when you start teaching. How did they do? Or we can say, okay, these people need nudging. On their own, they won't give data. But this crowd will give data. They are more compliant. So we will get. That will depend upon a culture. Every institution has got a culture. Every crowd has built its own culture. Now, if you consider how much of data was collected, school D with 62 students, 62 people gave their personal data. There are 17 features that I asked for. It's a table of 56 rows and 17 columns. Their skills, 47 gave, again, 17 parameters I had asked for. School P out of 41, 40 people had given. School K out of 47, 26 gave their personal data and only 14 gave information about their skills. Fine, that indicates some culture. And we will see if it is anything related with the crowd. The volunteering of the data, readily sharing the data, does it have anything to do with the culture? We will not be able to say for sure, but there would be indicators. And we can see if there is any correlation to that. Now, simple things first, female to male ratios. We see more and more female students in the post-graduation. That is quite a nice thing. And the information that we have got here, one school 33:23, other school 25 to 15. Okay, 25 and 15. I cannot say 25 to 15. They're all math teachers will kill me. And school K 13 and 13 is the data that I have got. So if it helps in visualizing and if it is useful in some places, like in this case, maybe for reports or for the sake of publishing something, etc. Otherwise, this pie chart doesn't reveal anything much more than the numbers. Now, qualification of the students. This would be interesting. It is an indicator of their, sometimes about the preparedness, or sometimes about the domain with which they would be comfortable with. And experience is another parameter to consider, how many years of work experience they have. But in schools D and P, most of them are fresh graduates. I have not gone to analyzing the experience aspect. Now, what is revealing here in these three schools, if you can see these three bar graphs, one school has got majority of the students with BCom qualification, the commerce graduate. Then BE, BCE, BBA, Bachelor in Vocational Training, and BSc. You see the spread. When you go to the second school, I find majority are engineering graduates and much, much lower of the BCom, BCA, BSc, and BVoc. And these schools are just 4 kilometers from each other in the same city. When you come to the school K, we find majority of them are BA. Next comes, when I say BE, it is BE, BTech, any degree in engineering. Then BCom and BSc and BBA, MBA. You see the spread totally changes from one school to another school, at least in this case, live case, it is totally different. Now, as teachers, how does it help us to know in advance about the background of the students rather than meeting them first time when we enter the class, when you are not prepared anything, in the process of preparing courseware. And we all like to teach by examples, teach with examples. Now, when I go to school D, and if I'm talking about plotting, I better take simple interest, compound interest, talk about balance sheet, talk about some accounting practices, which I don't know much, but I have to learn it. I have to discuss that for them to feel at home. They understand they should not be spending time in understanding the domain rather than the concepts and the technologies behind. Similarly, when I go to the school P, because most of them have technical background, they have no interest in the interest rates. Their interest will be something totally different. Can I bring in some examples of a machine shop, production line, Charles' law, Boyle's law, whatever it is? Can I dig back to my understanding of basic science and engineering when I go to the school P? Because if I don't do that, I miss the students. I miss the link. The distance between students and me will increase if I talk of a domain which is distant to them. So this itself helps a great deal. The kind of examples that we can quote, kind of exercise we can give them, assignments we can give them. In a school K, there is a mix. So how does it help? Knowing that, okay, there is a mix. We make teams. We expect the students to have a lot of peer learning at the post-graduation level. So if I need to make teams, I would make, okay, at least one with the technical background, one with the BA, okay, maybe 2 each, then BCom 1 each, BSc 1 each, BBA, MBA. So I can have teams with the strength of 4 or 5. So 2 with the technical background, 2 with the arts background, and 1 each with the other background, or whatever way we can display. So formation of team, then we know that they will teach each other. They will learn a lot rather than picking up on their own. Okay, we have been school buddies and we can talk a lot about economics being BA graduates, and we can talk about technology being BE, and if they group together like that with the same background people being in the same team. So then in some topics, one group will do very well. In other topics, other group will do very well. There may not be, we will not be taking advantage of the heterogeneity of the input, which is quite a good thing, quite healthy thing, especially in management studies. In some cases, like, if you're teaching MSc Computer Science or MTech, then it is not necessary. This spread won't be there because the qualification to enter that level to do MTech would be BTech or BE. So there is no confusion there. But in the B schools, this will become very, very relevant to know the background, because people can come from diverse backgrounds. Then if you consider the home state that we had asked for, why ask home states? Now, if you see here the diversity of the students population, school D and school P, we find majority are from Karnataka. In school D, we can see a sprinkle of Kerala and Tamil Nadu. In school P, we find, okay, some Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh. But still majority are for Karnataka. School K, we find Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, West Bengal, Madhya Pradesh, etc., etc. There is a bigger mix, a better mix of people from various parts of the country. Now let us get back to the School D and School P. Now, I know personally that these schools had attracted many students from other states earlier. Now, this tendency that only mainly people from Karnataka are in the class now is probably because of the pandemic. People from other states traveling all the way, or just to have online classes, they don't have to admit to a college in Bangalore. Maybe the reason. And I suspect that is the reason probably. So here we have got a cause and effect thing, which is fine for us. So we have a reason, we think, but we can verify. We can see what happens next year, next to next year. If this does not change, then it is indicating an action. Look, earlier we used to have many students coming from various other states, and looking at the records, we can construct similar charts for year after year, and we can see the change in the inflow of students from other states. We definitely want a good mix that is healthy for the people to learn about other culture and work together. Now again, coming to the School K. School K is in Hyderabad. And if you see in Hyderabad, which is in Telangana, we know which are the neighboring states. But if you see, the students from Telangana are far less than the students from Andhra Pradesh. And Andhra and Telangana, with a bit of fight, they separated. Now Andhra Pradesh students are more fond of schools in Telangana, and Telangana students, I do not know if they're going to Andhra Pradesh. Maharashtra is the only neighboring state which has got maximum number of students. Other neighboring states, like for example, Karnataka, there is just one student from Karnataka in this group. From Jharkhand all the way, there is one student. From West Bengal all the way, there are students. Haryana, there are students, but from the neighboring states of Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka, we don't find students. So for the administration, it may be right to think what is happening. Ultimately, these higher studies are marketing activity as well. It is not good for the schools that students don't come, and we want from all over. So this is an indicator for the administration as well. For me, I see, okay, there is a mix of crowd coming from all over the country, from several states of the country, and the kind of examples or the talks I can give would totally be different. Like I know, because my mother tongue is Kannada, in School D and School P, if the requirement comes, I say, okay, one student doesn't understand what I'm telling, I can go near and confidently speak in Kannada, others not feeling bad about it, which I cannot do here in the School K, because there is nobody. It doesn't make good sense. It is not justified that I talk in a language which most students do not understand. That is the kind of input I have. And this does help in some PG course. When I know that everybody understands Kannada, I may just slip into Kannada to explain this particular thing, and the students do feel very nice about it. So this is the states aspect. Now let us look at the mother tongue aspect, which is supplementary, but there is again some lesson to learn here. Now School D, though it is represented by only 3 different states, you can see the mix of language as mother tongue: Hindi, Konkani, Malayalam, Marwadi, Tamil, Telugu. It is not just Kannada. Similarly, School P, we got another mix. School K, if you see, we saw the states from which the people are coming and the language they speak. Now, there are 3 people from West Bengal, but here there is not a single person speaking Bengali as mother tongue. There are 3 people who are speaking Malayalam here as mother tongue, but there is nobody from Kerala as hometown or the home state. So this shows the migrant population is represented well here. We are talking about educated migrants. It may be first generation migrants or second generation, whatever it is. But we know that there is a fair mix of migrants in the class, and I have got a hypothesis. It has to be proven. Okay, the many people talk about that the migrants work harder. So this is another area of investigation for us, inquiry, telling that if I got the student records of several years, have these migrants been doing better than non-migrants? Can be a query. And if it is so, is there any action related with that in the teaching methodology or reaching out to them, etc., etc. Again, so that it ends there. With one thought I leave. I do not know the answer, but this is indicating an area for further studies. Age distribution, again, we can see school D, where we had maximum become graduates, the mean age is 22.5. School P, where BE is the main qualification, it is up by 1 year, because we know that to go through an engineering degree takes a year more than a science and arts degree. So that is very clearly indicated. And the school K, because people have come with more experience, the total age distribution also is different. And you can see the distribution of age also, like school K, we say, okay, there is somebody who is right outlier here. He is older than many of the teachers in this school, in this class. So it does help. So we have got some people who can command over others because of their experience and age. In other schools, we don't have. Everybody's just finished their teenagers and reached to the school. Very good. So here we have got a better spread. And if you can use it for our advantage, fine. So we talked, so thus far what we have done is, we talked about at the entry level entry of the teacher to the class, based on the information that we gather, can we modulate ourselves? What kind of coursework we'll prepare? What kind of assignments we can give? What kind of domains we can choose? And what to expect out of them based on their maturity, based on their background, and how prepared they are. Certain amount of information we can have, then we can probe further. Now let us say the day-to-day activity of the teacher after the course starts. One thing that we all need to do is that we give an assignment. Who has submitted the assignment? Who has not submitted? Is it compliant with what we have told them to do? How much of variation is there? How much of extra work is there, etc., etc. We have to keep track. So, Dr. Raz, I just want to take 2 minutes off. I'll come back. Is that acceptable?
Sure, sir.
Yes, sir.
I'll be back in 2 minutes. I think
Okay,
it's
sir.
something which I cannot hold back.
Yes,
2-3 minutes, I'll be back. Promise.
Yeah, sure, sir.
Please bear with me. I'm extremely sorry. I apologize for that.
No issue, sir.
Okay. I'm sorry for taking that break. Okay, we're at a logical point. I can continue, I hope.
Yes, sir, sure.
Thank you. So, sorry for that break.
No issues.
Okay. So let us consider one thing that many of us or most of us don't like is that, have you submitted your assignment? Let me check. Oh, I had done here. I have done that. So a lot of excuses keep coming, which is the reality in most of the institutes. So we can very easily track it. What we can do is that we have a shared Google Drive or whatever, say you like, Dropbox, whatever. Create one subdirectory per student using the student's ID. It is just a one-line script to create that. Even if you got 600 people, we can, with a simple script, we can create the directories. And share each folder only with the students with that ID, so that others don't have access. This I learned by the hard way. Because if you just share one folder and ask every student to upload their assignments there, then they say, oh, he or she copied from me and you have caught us for copying. It's not my fault, it is not his fault, we get into that legal battle. So we create one folder per student having the access right only to him or her. Very necessary to create a naming convention for each assignment. Then only we'll be able to check it automatically. Assignment number or even the date of assignment helps a great deal. All the students upload their assignments to the respective folder. Then all that we can do, we can run a script as often as you want and see who has posted the assignment or not. The assignment tracking becomes just a click away. And we can also automatically send emails to the students who have not submitted the assignments. You can send 10 reminders a day if you like, or as often as you want. So the bother of looking at every time looking at who has submitted, who has not submitted goes down. And we can get a list of students who have not submitted assignment anytime. And okay, this code has come in between. I know the reason, so forget about this part that's showing here. So in this case, I gave an assignment to the students of a school, telling that write minimum 500 words about themselves. It's a personal story that I needed them to write, so that we can use our sentiment analysis or various NLP techniques on what they have written. When the students write their own data, then there is nothing strange about it. They know what exactly they have done. So when I told them that you write 500 words or 500 or more, I don't have to open any document by just without looking at the document, running a script. I know these are the IDs of the students who have written less than 500 words. Okay, 409 I may forget, but somebody has written only 89 words instead of 500. Somebody else has written 167 out of 500. Now I can target my work, tell it, okay, let me open this document who has written only 89 words instead of 500 words, only 167 words instead of 500 words. In addition to sending a mail and reminder, there may be a reason, there may be some learning that we have from these outliers. Anybody who does something strange always teaches us something new, something good. Similarly, if somebody has written instead of 500 words was what I expected, if somebody writes 5,000 words or 2,000 words, then there is an issue there also. Just being verbose, writing something irrelevant will be indicated when we expect 2-page write-up, somebody gives 10-page write-up, there is something that we smell. That could be the first part. We can also see the date and time of submission, the time of the file. And we can also do an analysis, say maybe time series analysis, telling that, okay, what is the pattern of submission? If I say submit on 20th, how many of them would submit on 20th? I think 10%. And at what hour? If somebody submits early, is the quality better or worse? Somebody submits at the last moment in a hurry, the possibility of copying somebody else's work or copying from the internet, is that higher or not? That kind of analysis is possible. I have not done it, but this is something that is indicated, is possible to do. Checking length of the document, I just mentioned. Check for plagiarism. One check we can do on the sites are available where you can do free of cost. You have to upload each document and they will run through the plagiarism check and tell. Or Grammarly will just tell, okay, there is plagiarism or not, how, where, when exactly, what exactly is copied, they won't be able to tell. Or we can spend money and buy tools. But for this kind of work, we don't have to buy tools. We can build our own tool, and which will be more effective in the sense we have better control over it. We can tune it according to the need. Check for plagiarism. And we can extract keyword. We can make the document summary. So these are all the tools. Some of them require some machine learning models. Some of them are plain and straightforward. Now let us start with the readability index. especially the humanities subject, how readable the document is. Now, I ran this readability check on the document submitted by the student, writing their own story, 500 words that I mentioned. So here we see that the readability is pretty good. Most cases, the readability is very good. But in some case, we see the readability is very high because the person has written probably only 50 words. There is nothing readable or unreadable there. There is nothing to read there, but the readability could be very high. So this outlier itself indicates, okay, there is something funny there. And here it is negative. Why is it negative? We have to go and check it. This document was not submitted at all. And some places we have got a very low readability, which is a matter of concern. Now, if you go and look at these specific documents, which indicate below average or above average readability expected of the class, then it helps us to do some targeted work and guide those students, coach those students to do better work. So this is something that we can always do for any essay type work that we give. And if appropriate, if necessary, we can do some sentiment analysis. Now here we told the students write their own story. So here it is appropriate, we do some sentiment analysis, how positive they are, how negative they are, where is the polarity. So we have got this score that is coming from sentiment analysis. So I've taken part of it. I have not taken for the whole lot of 56 students. So the compound is the polarity, the total polarity, leaning towards the positivity. So total polarity, there is nothing much to plot. I have not plotted that. We could. Then the negative, neutral, positive polarity, and the word count also I have included here. I'm not showing the use of it. So if we plot only the sentiment analysis, the positive and negative polarity, we see that in this case, the positive polarity, it varies. Some students are less positive, some students are highly positive. So there is such a variation in the positive sentiments, and there is also variation in the negative sentiment. But fortunately, encouragingly, there is far less negative sentiment expressed in the story that they have written compared to the positive side. That is very positive, nice to feel about. I felt quite good about. But if we are interested in studying further, going deeper, we can bunch the students who are less positive, more positive. We can group them into 2, 3, 4, talk to them separately and say what is happening, what is the issue like. An action indicator, but not that I have done. Sometimes it helps us to know the keywords in the document. What are we talking about? And any article that we write, there is a bunch of keywords that we have to write in the beginning. So here, if you want to extract the keywords pretty straightforward, so we have extracted the keywords from these works done by the students. So as I expected, MBA, subject, required, like, exploring, Bangalore, asked, question, etc., etc. So for each document, we got the keywords extracted, and 391, of course, there is no keyword because the document is empty. Computer, MBA, electronics, data, business. So it gives some indication about the person and the content in the document that he or she has submitted. Here I have told, okay, give me 5 keywords by the order of importance of that keyword, plain TF-IDF calculation. And we can increase 10 keywords, 15 keywords, whatever it is. And we can exclude more and more keywords by using adding them to the stop words. We exclude the stop words. So if I say, okay, name can be excluded from here, so I have to add it to the stop word, so it gets filtered out. And you say MBA comes too much, it is not of any value to me. It becomes a keyword, but I don't need it because I already know it. So I can add to the keyword stop words and filter it out. Like this should have been excluded. I should have added to the stop word, so I can do that myself. It doesn't convey anything to me. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So keyword extraction is another small little program that we can write. And text summarization. We all know the importance of text summarization. So for long answers, the first step of evaluation, we can create the text summary, read the text summary, which will lead us to somewhere. Now here, as an example, I have taken the text from the brochure that we all have. So about DSC, about Department of Mathematics, about the course, etc., etc. So we have got this longish text that all of us have read. So I said, in 3-sentence summary, tell me what is this text about. So the summarized text reads about FDP, objectives. So it is clearly identified. The summary, the most important aspect of this communication is about the FDP. Quite good. Then it talks about the Department of Mathematics, telling the department is offering an elective proposed and taught by industry person, etc., etc. So 3 sentences we have got, which is not bad in the sense, generally it is indicating what the document is about as a summary. I can increase the length of summary if you want, and I can keep tuning it. I can improve the software. Right now it is a rough cut. We can improve the software also. For example, here, a dot and space. Okay, this has become a totally 1 sentence. I can tune it. It is not much of a work at all. So keyword extraction, text summarization are the kind of things which you can keep doing. Now let us consider plagiarism. Generally, when we read tens of submissions, say I read a submission today, another submission I may read tomorrow morning, another few submissions tomorrow afternoon. In the mind of mind, I say, oh, it looks familiar. This has somebody else also has written. But to go back and say, okay, who has written, doing it manually is very difficult unless you are so sharp. I can't do that. So there are 50, 60 people who have submitted. To know who has copied from whom, reading them manually, one after the other, and then remembering which matches with whose and by how much is almost an impossible task. Now here is a situation where I asked them to form into teams, and you can see here there are 7 teams. No, not 7 teams, 11 teams were formed. So these 11 teams submitted their code. They were to write some software code and submit. They submitted the code. When the code was submitted, as I mentioned, I read through the code, and I had a feeling, okay, some code looks very similar to the other code, but whose code? Then it is a matter of running a cosine similarity check on all these documents together. And we see team 11 and team 13, the similarity is 1. Means it is a total copy without a change in the full stop or a comma or a space. Character to character, it is a total copy of one's work by the other. Now, who has copied whom? We'll have to go to the court of law to decide that. Second team, 0.995554, it is as good as 1. Again, total copy. Team 14 and 6, good amount is copied. 9 and 7, again, good amount is copied. So here is a situation where there has been an ethical issue. Now, as a teacher, do you feel good about it? One thing. Another, is it easy to exactly demonstrate who has copied which sentence and which phrase from whom? Manually, it is not convenient. So this boring stuff or inconvenient stuff or tough, difficult, it is all of them together. It is not a very rewarding experience to find that, okay, somebody has copied from somebody else, hold them up. It is not a pleasant experience at all. It is not an easy task either if to do manually, or it probably cannot be done in a large heap of assignments people would give. And this is something repeated. Every time there are set of submissions given, there is an inkling, okay, we should do this. And if it is our own tool, we can tune it the way we want. And here is a very clear indication that this team is copied from here. Now there is a mute question. Do boys cheat more than girls, or girls cheat more than boys, or there is no bias at all? Yeah, one case is not the final case. We can keep doing it over and again. In this case, what I saw, the teams were formed by the students. They said, okay, we will work together, we will work together, we will work together. And because majority of them came from a particular background, either majority were from the technical background, or majority were from the arts background. So there was no distribution needed. Okay, somebody with skills, somebody without skills. So it was quite okay that they formed the teams on their own. And teams with the high cosine similarity for 9 boys, 1 girl. Teams with the low cosine similarity, 7 boys to 6 girls. So at least this is indicating that girls don't cheat. At least this case is quantified. We can observe more and more cases, and we can definitely tell, okay, look here, you girls are far better than boys. Not only scoring in the subject, or also being sincere about the work that you do as an assignment. Even if there is an opportunity to cheat, you did not cheat, others have. We are not telling anything wrong because there is a proof. We can just put these 2 documents, run a diff, and say, okay, this word, this sentence, this one is absolutely identical. And it cannot happen by coincidence to that large scale. So that is something that we can definitely do. And we can check various other factors based on the features segregated by mother tongue, state, hometown, etc. etc. We can do endless work, because once you have got the data, if you listen to the data, data will speak to us. We can also consider automatic grading. Like we can do the cosine similarity check. If not totally automatic, we can get a tool which can help us in grading. Like we can have a model answer. Not only one, we can have a set of model answers, 3, 4, whatever it is. And model answers, anyway, many of the institutes ask for model answers when you make a question paper. So especially a longish essay-like situation, we can match the model answers with the assignments submitted by the students or answers submitted by the students. And if it is close to the model answer, then we know, okay, this person has given what is needed and what to exclude, what not to exclude. There is a difference between the copying and matching with the model answer. Then we can say, okay, these are better done, others are not. Like in a MOOC, when there are thousands or tens of thousands of people enroll, and evaluating what we do in a matter of minutes, it's done automatically. How it is done? By looking at the closeness, by looking at the distance from the model answer to the answers that we give. So automatic evaluation is quite possible, not only in yes, no answers, not only in the MCQ, even in the essay type of questions. It is possible to take help of tools to evaluate the quality of answer, how close it is to the ideal answer. And if it's a typical software project, we can do the code review automatically to a great extent. The code style, coding style, choice of variable names, make-away complexity, comment to code ratio, the length of a method, lines of code per class. So whatever metrics we want to collect, we should be able to automate that. Some tools are already available, but these tools available in the market are oriented towards one person's work, which we can very conveniently extend. We don't have to do much of original work using those tools, using their APIs, or if needed, writing our own tool also is not all that difficult. And we can do automated code reviews. If it is mostly software development oriented work, software oriented subject we are teaching, we can build that kind of tool also. So once we start building these tools, our experience grows and we find more opportunities to do that. Another thing is report writing. Like if you're running an MBA course or the post-graduation, the dissertation that people have to write, definitely after an internship, work in the project, etc., people have to write reports. And what is a report if there is no picture? What is a report if there is no conversation? So we need to insert a lot of graphics, a lot of pictures. That is all work. Now I will show you the document that I have been showing you so far. From beginning to the end, you see there are some kinds of graphics, not complicated, but at least you see here a box plot, a bar graph, a histogram, a pie chart. You find some text here, and you find some table somewhere. Here there is a table with a proper column header, labels, values. It is not a plain text, it is a table. So we have got some graphics here, not very complicated though. And if needed, we can also insert a lot of complicated graphs. And we got a report here. Now, how was this done? How did I do that? I didn't write this document. This is what I wrote. So again, getting back to the Google Colab, or if you like, the Jupyter Notebook. So this is a Jupyter Notebook. As you can see here, this is a Jupyter Notebook. IPyNB, IPython Notebook. Analytics for Classroom, IPython Notebook. So this is the program, or this is the IDE in which I have written everything, spending a day plus. So right on the top, what you can see is what you have read. Now this is a markdown cell. When it's a markdown cell, those of you know, please bear with me. Those of you are seeing it for the first time. I'd say markdown means, we know HTML. HTML is a markup, M for markup. This is a markdown means simplifying the whole thing, making it more human friendly and writing it. For example, how it is written is like this. So double hash to indicate it is a header 2. So the font size is indicated, and whatever we have written the thing. And to make the list, just give the number, making the table some other thing. So this is what we write. And once we write this, when we execute this, or what comes as a result is here. Something in highlighted, something listed. We can have bullet list, we can have table, whatever we want. Then I got some code here. This is mainly to restrict or having the word wrapping function so that nothing moves beyond the width of the screen. And here I got some imports in the Python. And here I'm reading the data that you have submitted. And the whole data that you have submitted is here. And okay. So it is an active document in the sense, as I'm reading the document, I can keep running the code and see, okay, it is happening or not. So it is still work in progress. So it will take some time to import all these modules. Okay, it has imported. Now, having imported, I can write another. I'm just putting some samples here. Sample 2. Say I want 2 sample rows here. Let us see if we are getting it. Okay, here it is. This is the information that you had given. Okay. Dr. Rita Shukla, number 766, Mrs. Dr. Preeti. Okay, now this has not, I have not caught it as, okay, maybe I don't remember now exactly. Yeah, I have not caught it because it is Mrs. Doctor. So this doctor I have not caught. So instead of 59, you have to make it 60 now. And here, whatever information you have given while registering, based on that, we have analyzed about your experience at least. And here is the way, here is where we have made the groups of 0 to 5 years, etc., modified the thing and gone down, experience group. And the graph also is drawn here, available in the Jupyter Notebook that we are using. And going down, we can see the information about the B schools. Whatever text you are seeing is in the markdown cells. Go down, etc., etc. So on and so forth. So all these pictures are generated. It is not copy pasted from somewhere. It is not created using any other tool. It is used. It is created using the code right here. So, for example, this table that I made is here. Making this table, you know, it takes a good amount of time usually to write a table. But here, all that we have to do is that this is how we write a table. So the table is written like this, separating by 5 characters, whatever we want to separate. And when we run it, you got a fairly good presentable table. On and on. So then again, later you can see so sentiment analysis, for example, we start using natural language toolkit of Python, sentiment analyzer, and on and on. So all the, so what I want to tell is that for the sentiment analysis, this is the amount of code. That's all what we have to write to get this. So sorry, the readability index. Readability index, the amount of code that we have written is just 5-6 lines, nothing more than that. And if you did not want to plot this, so this entire amount, this amount is only for plotting. To actually get the readability index, all that we have to write was 1 line code, 2 lines of code. It is not very complex. It is pretty simple. And so goes to the sentiment analysis. We needed to do very, very little amount of coding that we need to do. And keyword extraction, about 25 lines of code for keyword extraction. Text summarization, another 40-50 lines of code for the summarization. And plagiarism check, a little more coding, no, not much of it, about 25-30 lines of coding, etc. So once we make our feet wet, once we get into that, then all of this becomes very enjoyable, and we feel very satisfied. Okay, I could do something for myself. So I stitch shoes for my children also. They don't walk bare feet. It is not just that I teach others how to build tools. I build tools for my own use. And over the period as an institute, we can have a repository of such tools. And if more people start using it, they will develop much faster. They'll become more and more robust, repeatedly usable. So it is 15:20. We have got another 10 minutes. I'll be very glad to respond to any query, any question, and I would be very glad to work with any one of you or any number of you in this area. I live in Bangalore. I don't attend any office. My hobby is related with the kind of work that I do. So thank you so much for listening to me, and good, bad, ugly, whatever of what I have discussed, most welcome to discuss with me. For another 10 minutes, I'm available online. Later also, anytime, I'll be glad to interact. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for informative session on data analytics in classroom, sir. I have a question, sir. Can I ask, sir?
Please.
Yeah, sir, actually. Thank you so much, sir. So in this session, you have taken different type of schools and categorized, also taken some parameters accordingly and applied the data analytics code and the concepts. So, my question is there any other example to apply this data analytic codes and concept like marketing and business, so on and so forth?
Yes, Dr. Geeta, definitely. See,
Yes.
This is a small example. You know that the whole world is breathing through data. whatever we do, there is some data that is captured in marketing, recommendations, and for social good, for harming others, for doing good to others, the medicine. Like if you take an X-ray, the analysis is done using machine learning.
Okay, sir.
Machine learning has come in a very, very big way, and data analytics is an entry to that. Like I myself do a lot of work on the public data, mainly the electoral data. And as an example, in the year 2012, in Bangalore alone, they deleted 13.5 lakh voters out of 65 lakh voters.
Okay.
And
Okay.
using the analytics approach, I could quantify, I could tell that these are the people who are illegally deleted. Now get them back to the rolls. When they did not listen, I went to the court, won the case, and got them back into the rolls. So if you can get such results, then it is definitely satisfying and rewarding. We can. There is no area where we cannot use data analytics. Classroom is a smaller example, especially in the field of medicine, astronomy. You name the field, wherever there is a lot of research.
In astronomy, sir?
Oh, a lot.
Oh, super, sir.
It's a huge, area of application for data science.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Yeah, dear participants, do you have any question to ask, sir? You can ask now. Okay, sir, we'll conclude the session. Okay, now I request Ms. Shashi Rekha to conclude the session.
So thank you so much, sir, for your wonderful session.
Thank you, Dr. Dada. Thank you.
Okay. So, dear participants, feedback link will be posted in the chat box. Kindly fill the feedback.
Participants, be stay in the link only. Next, we will have a discussion session.
So do you expect me to sign off now?
Yes, sir, you can sign.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. Very kind of you attending to this session. Thank you. Bye.